You are listening to The Journey. This broadcast is coming to you from the Mountain Ocean Sun studio in Kobe, Japan. And this is our second show of our series called The Journey, and the title of today's show is Finding Rest in the Storm. We all have very hard moments in our lives where we are faced with stress and sadness, and we may also be faced with some really tough choices at the same time. We could call this having our own personal storm in our life. This show is focused on finding a comfort and a knowing that all will be for the good in the end, even though this may seem impossible at the moment we are in our storm. Also, this show will focus on finding guidance through the storm so we can clearly find the best way out of our stressful situation. Today, we'd like to welcome back to the show from Sasayama, Japan, Mr. John Saunders. Before we bring John on, I'd like to take a brief moment to touch on John's vast life experience that he brings to our show. John has been doing mission volunteer work for the past 37 years. He has traveled the world teaching a fundamental Bible message. He's done mission work in Germany, Portugal, England, Ecuador, Turkey, India, and finally here in Japan. For the past 29 years, John has worked in Japan as a preacher and a counselor and a disaster volunteer coordinator. And he's a father of 5, all born here in Japan. So please welcome back to The Journey, Mr. John Saunders. Welcome back, John.
Thank you, Steve. It is a privilege to have this opportunity to share some of my experience and some of the things that have happened in my life and what lessons, hopefully, that I've learned from it, because things do happen in life.
Absolutely. I mean, that goes right along with the theme of today, which is finding rest in the storm. So that implies that we all have storms in our life, right? Trials.
Oh, absolutely. In a simple way, just to kick us off today, I was just thinking about the one positive result of storms in the natural sense. When there is lightning produces nitrogen in the soil, which makes things grow. If there was no lightning, there'd be nothing growing. So the storm is an essential part of life to bring growth. And I was thinking we naturally don't tend to like storms. We want to avoid them. But I think they do bring in an essential part of life, the growth. It's the hardships and the difficulties that bring in the growth to life. So as much as our natural selves want to avoid it, it is essentially the most important part of what happens while we're here in this thing called life.
Stating it that way, it makes me think, well, then how can we allow the storms or these trials that happen in our life to transform our life into something positive and transform those experiences into something positive? How can we do that? Because it seems like for me, a lot of times through my life, I've gotten caught up in the storm or the trial that's happening, and I end up, in my past anyway, I used to just focus on the trial and get down and depressed or hurt or stressed about the trial as it was happening, and it would kind of grow. The trial would just grow, and I would get almost lost in it. So that would be my question, hearing you say that. If it's something that comes for our growth, how is it that we're able to transform it or change it to something that becomes growth rather than just ending in pain?
For all of us, that's a very important question to answer, because I think that it really relates to hope. And if we have hope in life, then it's looking beyond the storm, that we can know, okay, I'm in the middle of a storm and it's terrible and I really don't like it. But if I have some foundation understanding that somehow it's going to be okay, somehow it's going to make something happen for good, then I'm looking beyond the storm in hope. And that gives us the strength and the courage to go through the storm and not give up. But if we just clearly don't see what's beyond the storm, and our horizon is the storm, then it's very easy for us to get lost in it because we don't see anything beyond the storm. Having said that, it's not something that we can develop or create in the storm. It's like life generally doesn't happen one storm after the other. We have these somewhat tranquil periods between storms. And that's a time for us to work on developing, growing, and finding this foundation, this hope, this vision that will give us the strength to go through the storm when it does come.
So you're saying we're like built in the tranquil times or the more peaceful times in our life, we should work to build a stronger foundation so that because we know that storms and trials are a natural part of life.
Yes.
They're unavoidable, a part of life, just natural part of life, just as peaceful times are as well.
Yes. In a way, I don't want to say this kind of in a negative sounding direction, but if you don't have storms, then you kind of end up with the desert because it's a lack of nitrogen means nothing grows. And so you lose the nutrition in the soil in a natural sense. And I think in a spiritual sense, many of those things are parallels. That what happens in the reality of life happens in the physical world around us. And there are lessons and samples for us to see. So I think as much as we need those storms to keep things growing, we need those storms to keep ourselves growing and changing. And what we don't need is an absence of the storms. What we need is the strength to go through it. And I think, in a way, that's what we are hoping to impart. That's what we're hoping to share in our little talk today, is to share some of that foundation that I've personally found and that I'm sure you've discovered too. That it is this foundation that is below the storm that does help us through. And I was listening to a talk recently about, on a similar line, it was talking about the ocean actually, how it's a physical fact that the top of the ocean can be very stormy and waves and wind, but if you go down just a short distance, it's only a matter of meters. If you go down 10 or 20 meters, the water is calm and things are very, very different. And it's kind of like we have to plug into that calmness that is down there below the storm. And that's where we need to kind of have our roots.
So in other words, when you go deep into the ocean, just a matter of meters down, deeper down, that area never changes.
No, the water is calm.
Always.
It's always calm. Yeah. It's still, it's calm. And it's hard to even know that there's a storm happening above your head. We were talking about growing and cultivating, and I'm skipping around to different natural phenomena to try to explain some of these ideas. So if we think about the ocean, when a ship puts the anchor down, where does the anchor go? Does the anchor stay in the water? And if the anchor stays in the water, does it work as an anchor? Well, it may slow the ship down so that its movement is slower, but it sure won't stop it from moving. The anchor has to go all the way down to the bottom of the ocean, and it has to hit onto the seabed and attach to something on the seabed in order to hold the ship fast. And I think what we are trying to get to today is to help people see the circumstances, the storms of life are on the surface. But down below there are all the other things which often are our hopes too. But it's still water. It's kind of hopes in things that can change. But we have to get down even below those things, down to the rock foundation, down to the bottom, to the things that don't change. And when we really get down to there and connect with those things, then we have this anchor that will help us in the storm. And I think that's what we're really hoping to do today, is to impart some of what that foundation is, some of how to discover that foundation, how to connect with it.
So if you say, if you talk about the place that never changes, or getting to that foundation that never changes, that sounds right away to me like it's something that is more timeless, or more, it's like it always was and always will be, type of environment that you're
Very
talking
much
about.
so.
Yeah.
Very much so, because many of the things in life, as life moves on, life tends to get more and more temporary. In generations past, people would have the same career, would have the same job. They would do that job for 40 years. But more and more we find out that that's not the case with people, that their circumstances, their life, their job, their occupation, their relationships, they change much more frequently. And it seems like the water is moving much faster above. But still, as you said, down below there are these timeless foundations like love and faith and fear. Those things they were in the past, they are now, and they will be in the future. Those things are always there. And so in some ways we have to choose which foundation we want to have. Do we want to have a foundation in fear, or in love, or in faith? And some of those foundations are more effective than others. So I think that's really our goal today, is to help people maybe even see for the first time that there is a foundation below the storms.
You are listening to The Journey. I've always thought a lot of the old sayings that we grow up with, that I grew up with since I was a kid, like hope springs eternal, or faith springs eternal. I think that those sayings are almost all of them that have lasted for thousands of years, or however long they've been around. We don't really know, but they're just there. We call them, in the States, we call them sayings. But when I think about a lot of them, like that one, hope springs eternal, it's almost like beyond religion, beyond all those type of things that could be argued about, between different religions and stuff.
Yes.
There's something that humans instinctively know that they should have faith in, or that they can have hope, or they can have faith in. So in a way, we know instinctively there's something, but we might not know how to get there, or what it is exactly, So it's like, how can we get familiar with that place in reality? Because we know it's there. Otherwise, I think those sayings wouldn't be existing, like hope springs eternal, or faith,
Oh, absolutely. I mean, those sayings come from other people's lifetimes of experience. And if they found over their lifetime that saying in the end wasn't true, would that saying continue? I don't think so. People would stop using it. But those sayings do continue, because there is a foundation that was yesterday, that is today, and will be tomorrow. And I think, the important thing is to understand, or learn to understand, what really that foundation is. And that's hopefully what we're going to talk about today.
So that leads me to a question. That would be, what are some concrete steps that we can take towards finding this place that always was and always will be, and is a place of peace? When we're in these storms, how can we build our foundation? What are some things we can do?
Very good question. Okay, I'd like to start with actually a quote from the Dalai Lama. It says, "Inner tranquility comes from the development of love and compassion. The more we care for the happiness of others, the greater is our own sense of well-being." And so I think that's an amazing quote. The part of the quote at the end of there, it says, "The more we care for the happiness of others." And I think some of the steps we need to take first we have to realize the selfish life we live. Because it so surrounds us today, the consumer world. It's about consume, it's about me. And as long as we're kind of stuck in that mode, and we're trying to find things to fulfill us, trying to find things to comfort us, trying to find things to help us. It's all us focused. And I think one of the important steps is that we have to understand we need to look wider than that. That it's a bigger picture than just our concern about ourselves. And often, part of the strength to go through the storm is to see others who are going through the storm and have a measure of compassion for what they are going through. And I think that's one temptation that is really strong in this consumer world nowadays, is to be so I hesitate to say self-centered, but that's really how it is. That we are focused in on ourselves and are focused in on our own situations, and that only amplifies the problem to ourselves. But if we can start to focus on others, that helps to reduce the size of our own problem in a positive way.
That gets back to what I was saying, how in the storms that I've had in my life, many times I got caught up in my own trials, and really that's all I would really think about. It was almost like I don't care about anyone else's trials. At that time, I didn't care about anyone else's trials. I was so concerned only with my own that it would just actually grow because I was focusing in only on myself. So in a way, it seems like you're saying one step is, even if you're having your own trials, even if you're really hurting, is to not only think about yourself, but also see others' pain and start to try to help others as well.
I think that is, in the practical sense of what we can do. We always have a focus. We have to, as human beings, we focus on something. And if we are only focused on ourselves, well, it's, the result is what it will be. It's kind of negative. But if we can in some way, and I think what the Dalai Lama said there is, develop love and compassion. It's not something that just is an instant bang. It's not that some people have it and others don't. It's something that develops. It's something that grows. Well, everything grows from a seed, in a way. So it only takes that little seed from the beginning of trying to focus on somebody else's situation in a practical sense. And I guess the thought that came to me, we were using this example of the stormy sea, and down below the waves it's calm. If you're in a boat looking out at somebody who looks like they're drowning, then the first thing, if you're thinking of other people, is first thing you want to throw them a life raft to help them. But if you are in the water floundering around and somebody is next to you floundering around, the attitude is going to be so different. You may have some desire to help the other person, but you need to help yourself. You're drowning and I'm drowning. How are we going to help each other? So in a way, I'm hoping today that we can present to people what the boat is, so that we don't have to be drowning in storms of life and looking for this life jacket, this life ring, something to rescue us. But we can actually be in the boat. And when we're in the boat, it is so much easier for us to be able to look out to see others who need help. And well, what is the boat? And I think that again, I'm going to go back to the Dalai Lama's quote. It says, inner tranquility. The boat is having a tranquil heart. Having calmness in your own heart. If your own heart is calm and peaceful, then although the storm may be on the outside, it's not on the inside anymore. And I think that's where we either sink or swim in a way. If the storm is on the outside, then we have the opportunity to see how to deal with it, to see how to handle it. But if the storm is not only on the outside, but it's also on the inside, then we're kind of lost, we're drowning. So let's help people understand what this tranquil heart is, how to develop, how to get this tranquil heart.
When I was telling about, my trials and getting caught up in them, that's what I felt. I felt it like there was a storm happening in my outer life that was, in some ways, it was things or people I cared about in relationships around me, whether it be family or friends, were falling apart. And that was causing me to have, that was my storm, let's say. But at the same time, I was experiencing an inner storm from it at the same time. So it's like I had both. I had the outer storm and I had the inner storm. I was reacting to the outer storm with my own inner storm. So they both would grow bigger and bigger and bigger. So like finding the inner tranquility that you're talking about while the outer storm is going on is it's a challenge. You have to know where to look and how to do it.
Yes.
And that's kind of why I'm asking you. Like like you already gave one step. Okay, you said
have an outward focus.
Start thinking about others as well, even if you have your own storms.
And I think part of it is, we did mention at the very beginning that the time to work on building a foundation is not in the storm. It's between the storms. But maybe that's not practical in some people's situation. You're in a storm. What do? How do you just get through so that you can prepare for the next one, in a way? So let's take a little look at that. We need to understand that a tranquil heart is life to the body. That's a Bible quote from the book of Proverbs. The word tranquil here in the original Hebrew language, in essence, it means a heart free from envy, with its emotions and passions under control. It is calm, confident, not fretful or frenzied. Instead of letting our hearts grow envious, we should ask God to help us cultivate a serene heart. Now, I mentioned just slightly earlier about focusing, and we need to focus on others. But I think it's very, very, very important for us to understand how we focus on others. Do we focus on others to see what they've got, what their situation is, and how we lack that? Do we look at others with envy? And I think, we have two words there in English, which is envy and jealousy. Basically, envy is stuff and jealousy is people. We are jealous of somebody else's relationship, position, whatever, to do with people. And envy, it's about stuff. So we are focusing on other people and stuff. And I think, when I said we need to focus out on others, that really wasn't the sense in which I was hoping to get others to focus outwardly. But I understand now, and in my own words, that that's the natural tendency, is when we start looking out, we start looking at how others have it better than me. And we start to envy, we start to feel bad about ourselves, our situation, and those things. And as you said earlier, we start to flap around in the storm and create our own waves, which just develop the storm and make it worse. So we have to understand that this tranquil heart. How do we get it?
Mm-hmm.
How do we find it? And I'm going to take a few words from this page I have in front of me. It says, we cultivate a tranquil heart when we saturate ourselves with God's word, tucking His wisdom into our heart. Then we can retrieve His word when we need it to speak to our situations and calm our sometimes out of control emotions. So we cultivate this tranquility. It's not just an instant bang we have it. It's something that we have to cultivate, something that grows. And so let's look one more step at that. Cultivating tranquility. We cultivate a tranquil heart when we trust God with our circumstances. When we believe He has our best interests at heart. That's something we really have to discover. That God is not out to get us.
Mm-hmm.
That God is out to help us. God is there for us. He always has been and He always will be. But when these storms of life come, it really doesn't seem like that. It often seems to us that God is out to get me, if there's a God at all.
That's, when you said that, that's kind of what I thought of. I was thinking it's a challenge to get familiar with God, because you use the word cultivate. So that means that there's actually some work. In a way, it's work. There's work involved. There's study involved. There's so many historical texts, starting with the Bible, mainly the Bible, but there are ways that we can become familiar. Because I've noticed, okay, if I look at my own personal life, okay, say I'm single and I want to start maybe meeting someone to possibly date them, okay? If I'm in that situation, I've got to learn to get familiar with the lady that I'm meeting. It's a process. Actually, it takes work. I've noticed it's like I have to write to them, maybe send them a lot of emails or texts. I have to meet with them. And then as I meet with them, I'm getting familiar with them in a natural way, because I'm actually, in a way, I'm studying who they are through giving my time to them, through being around them. And sometimes it makes me, if I feel they're a good person, it makes me feel closer to them. And some of them, it pushes me away because it's not going to work for me. I noticed that. So I noticed that as I've come closer to Jesus and God in my heart, it's been through familiarity. It's been through learning how to become familiar. Because when you say the word God already, that even in my mind, it's such a vague, there's so many arguments, wars over that word. So how do we cultivate relationship with God so that it's something that's not just a word, but it's someone that's alive in our hearts?
Oh, that's a very good point. And, tranquility has a lot to do with that, because it's based on trust, and you cannot trust somebody you are not familiar with. And so, exactly as you've mentioned here, it's a matter of cultivating relationship. And I think there is a very, very open parallel between cultivating relationships with people and cultivating relationships with God. It takes time, it takes step by step, and it takes openness. If I say grow into it, it's kind of a vague answer, but that's what it takes, step by step. You write a letter to somebody, you get their answer, you write another letter, then you get to meet them, and a relationship grows. And it's exactly the same how it is in our relationship with God.
You are listening to The Journey. This is the end of part 1. We invite you to continue on with Finding Rest in the Storm, part 2, here on the same podcast. Thanks for tuning in.